Now you listen here, partner. This town ain't big enough for the both of us. I ain't got no good reason, but I don't like you. I know a lot of people love you, and I do like that you're a JRPG with a Western US aesthetic. The puzzle solving aspects of the game are fun too, but I still don't like you.
Bloop boop boo. Bloop doop doo. Bloop doop da.
Hi, I'm Michael. I want to state up front, I have beaten this game in the past, but I did not beat it after starting it recently. As I said in the opening, I don't really like this game. I couldn't bring myself to finish it this time. But if I go through all of the details like I normally do for these reviews, I can't find many specific spots where I would take points off. So it's kind of in a weird limbo. Wild Arms is a JRPG developed by Mediavision and published by Sony in Japan at the very end of 1996. It was produced by Takashi Fukushima and written and designed by Akifumi Kaneko. In Wild Arms, we follow Rudy, Jack, and Cecilia. They team up to try and stop the metal demons from taking over the world. The bare bones of the story make it sound not particularly interesting, but many of the finer points of this story make it pretty nice. One thing that I think is really interesting is that the world of this game has a Western American feel to it, something we don't see much in JRPGs. This Western feeling shows up not only in the design, but also in the characters, some of the writing for these characters, and most effectively, in the music of the game. I will say that this Western theme doesn't seem particularly consistent, though. Alongside cowboy hats and firearms, more on them in a moment, we have castles and kingdoms and swords. You could point out that cowboys and, for instance, samurai existed at the same time in our actual history here on Earth, but the castles and kingdoms seem mostly pretty European in design. I feel like the westernness of the design is almost there. It could have just been refined a bit to be great. More on the firearms now. This game calls them arms, hence the wild arms of the name. Arms were created by humans long ago as weapons in a previous war against the metal demons, but are now seen as too dangerously destructive, so are forbidden. Rudy, one of our heroes, uses arms, and thus is made an outcast. I'm a bit torn on the characters in this game. I think Jack is a pretty fun character, especially as you learn his backstory, but it's pretty easy to pick up his backstory before they tell you directly. Cecilia is alright. She's a pretty typical, determined, magical princess lead, but at least she has a quirk of a big appetite. Also, she has a princess cutting off her hair to show character growth moment 4 years before Final Fantasy IX did it. But then we get to Rudy. Rudy is the silent protagonist of the game, but you play as Rudy, Jack, and Cecilia for roughly equal amounts of time. It makes no sense that Rudy doesn't get to speak when the other two do. Because of this, Rudy doesn't have much of a personality. All we know is that he was kicked out of the town he was in. We don't really get to hear what he thinks about it directly, only through flashbacks and cryptic suggestions about who he is. When we finally learn more about his past, it is somewhat interesting. But then comes the bigger problem with our three heroes. They have incredibly flimsy reasons to be traveling together. Jack and Cecilia both want to get back at the metal demons, but Jack even says that he doesn't want to travel with Cecilia. And throughout this whole time, Rudy just seems to be along for the ride. The lack of chemistry between the heroes and the near lack of a character at all for Rudy are a big part of what makes me not super interested to continue this game. The villains, however, are very interesting, but at least in the first half of the game or so, we see so little of them. As I've stated before in previous game reviews, I love it when villains have non-unified goals. The conflict between Siegfried and Mother is actually so interesting, and that makes Siegfried's character so much more interesting than it would be otherwise. As usual, I don't have a ton to say about the graphics of this game. I feel like I'm not really qualified to say that much, but I can at least talk about what I like and what I don't like. I do think it's interesting to compare the graphics in this game to the absolute titan of JRPGs that came out soon after Wild Arms, though, Final Fantasy VII. Both games have at least 3 different styles of visual storytelling: walking around the map, in battles, and, to a lesser extent, cutscenes. When I say cutscene animation for Wild Arms, I don't mean the actual cutscenes. Those happen in-engine, and they use the map sprites for that. What I'm using in its place is the gorgeous animated opening sequence. Final Fantasy VII's cutscenes, think Cloud getting on the Hardy Daytona, look really good. The interesting thing comes from comparing how everything looks on the game's various maps against how things look in battle. In Final Fantasy VII, the map graphics look kind of terrible in my opinion, but its battle graphics are a definite step up. Both of these modes use 3D polygons. In Wild Arms, the map graphics are presented in gorgeous 2D pixel art, but the battles are presented in this goofy 3D polygon style. Both games feel awkwardly disjointed between graphical styles, but which of the 2 styles looks better depends on the game. Whoa there, buckaroo! Are you enjoying this here vid? Why not give it a like? That'd be real nice. And why not subscribe while you're at it? You'll have a better chance of seeing the other game reviews, the music reviews, the covers, and the other stuff we put out on the channel. It'd be mighty kind of you. Get along now. In the intro, I mentioned the Western US feel to a lot of the design of this game. I also mentioned how that Western feel is not exactly consistent throughout the game. That's my biggest problem with it. It's not super consistent. Several of the characters, especially the villains, have cool designs, but the design of the heroes and the NPCs? Not bad, but not quite as interesting. None of the heroes feel explicitly Western in their designs. The helmets Jack wears are mostly cowboy hats, but his sprite doesn't wear a cowboy hat. He, Rudy, and Cecilia could be characters in pretty much any JRPG. I just wish the designs had gone a bit further and had been more consistent. Town design is actually quite good. The towns mostly look and feel pretty different, so the designers did well on that front. The dungeons were almost something really good. There's a good deal of puzzle solving in the dungeons, and it mostly uses various tools that the 3 characters have. If you switch to controlling a different character, you can use that character's tools to help you solve puzzles. For instance, Rudy has bombs, and Jack has a lighter. But the puzzles and the tools make me think of another JRPG, Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistrals from 1995. Several of the tools are pretty similar, and the way they are used in solving puzzles is also quite similar. 3 things make the puzzles feel stronger in Lufia 2, though. First, the puzzles in Lufia are done on a grid. You don't need to wonder if you've lined your shot up just right. If you're in direct line and you're facing it, you'll hit it. Second, you see monsters on the dungeon map with you in Lufia, and you also have to avoid them while you're solving puzzles if you don't want to get in fights. Battles are random in Wild Arms, so you could be interrupted while you're solving a puzzle. Last, the puzzles are just a hair more difficult in Lufia, so it feels like more of an accomplishment when you solve them. Another comparison with Lufia 2 and puzzle solving that I think is really interesting to note, but is not necessarily worse or better in Wild Arms, is the time. In Lufia, time only moves forward when you take a step, so it feels more like you're making strategic moves as you explore dungeons and solve puzzles. In Wild Arms, you can have timed segments, and other sprites can move freely. Like I said, this is not inherently better or worse, but it is definitely worse when you have to escape from a castle early in the game in Wild Arms, and it's unnecessarily difficult. The monsters in the game would look a lot better if they weren't rendered in the 3D battle system. There are some interesting ideas there, but I just wish I could see them as more detailed 2D sprites instead. The best element of Wild Arms is its sound. The sound effects are good, whatever, not a big deal. But the music. The music of Wild Arms, composed by Michiko Naruke, is really, really good. The opening theme, which I covered for the background of this video, feels very Western, and it also makes me feel like I want to go on an adventure. I especially want to talk about the tracks that have live musicians performing in them, and especially the tracks with chorus. Naruke's choral writing is so interesting. It can go from being really somber and beautiful in Funeral Procession to being intense and menacing in The Demon Tower That Pierces the Heavens. Let's look at each of these in detail. The Funeral Procession starts with these evocative woodwind chords that sound beautiful and simple, but the shape of the melody here is somewhat angular. The voice leading of the harmony is very smooth to balance that out. Next, the brass comes in, giving us a hint of the full melody of the song and warming up and filling out the texture. The voices come in, and they're just humming a beautiful, simple melody in octaves against a very simple piano part. As the rest of the orchestra comes back in with the voices, you really hear the conflicting sorrow and resolve in Cecilia and the people of Adelheid. This is basically good movie score composition here. In The Demon Tower That Pierces the Heavens, a menacing, repeating bass line sets up the mood immediately. When the chorus comes in chanting, it just adds to the mood. Like Molly and I talked about in our vocal color video, link below, vocal color can do a lot of work. The majority of the chorus is singing in a very bright, nasal, forward tone. This helps it sound more demonic. But then I can't tell if the other voices are a children's chorus or just the sopranos of the chorus singing with a pure tone as if they were a children's chorus. But the juxtaposition is incredibly effective. If you want to hear more excellent composition with live musicians performing it, check out Castle of Flames and especially Lamenting and A Promise, the two parts of the extended prologue of the game. Castle of Flames has a great groove to it, cool planing woodwinds, and an absolutely haunting piano part. Lamenting has an excellent guitar part, but then when the savage brass comes in to heighten the tension, it's so good. The strings suspend everything for a moment, and then the chorus comes in, again, just singing a melody in octaves. It's in a major key, but it somehow sounds so sinister. Excellent writing. Not all of the score is up to these heights, but most of the tracks, even the ones that just have electronic instruments playing the score, are also very good. If you skip the game, at least listen to the soundtrack. It's really excellent. I've talked about one of my main points in the gameplay category already, the puzzles in the dungeons, but there's definitely more to talk about. The biggest issue with the gameplay of Wild Arms, and the other main reason that I don't love this game, is the battles. There are far too many random encounters, and then the battles are mostly boring. I'm mostly saving up my special moves for the bosses, and then unloading everything on those bosses, using the same moves for nearly every battle. The special moves for the three characters are somewhat interesting. Rudy uses arms, which mostly need to be reloaded by someone in a town. They can also be upgraded by mechanics in most towns. Jack has sword skills that take MP, and he learns these skills from certain things he observes in the world. Cecilia mostly relies on her MP as the magic user of the game. I do really like how her magic works, though. You find an item that allows her to have one new spell, and then you go to a magic shop to synthesize that spell by combining 2 out of 4 elements, either as white magic or black magic. This means that there are 16 white magic spells and 16 black magic spells. Big ol' asterisk. Yes, I know there's more. And you can get these spells in whatever order you want. I mostly ended up only using 4 or 5 of them with any regularity, though. Otherwise, in gameplay, everything is at least fine. A minor gripe is that the walking speed is a little too slow, but the dash can be hard to control. I get that it's kind of supposed to be like that, but I found myself only very rarely dashing, so I just dealt with the slow walking speed. It's interesting. According to Wikipedia, most reviews of Wild Arms at the time of its release praised its graphics. It's so funny to me that something that was praised so much at the time, and don't get me wrong, it was on the bleeding edge of game graphics, to me just doesn't hold up. GameRankings' aggregate score for the game is a 79%. My formula score for this game is an 83%, but I feel like this game deserves a 75%. Like I said, I don't really care for the game, but if I look at each of the individual elements, I can't find as many specific flaws. If you average my two scores together, this game gets a 79%, so it matches the GameRankings score. This is where Wild Arms' score fits in with other game scores around it. As usual, I have to suggest that you take these game scores with a grain of salt. Our reviews for Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII were a long time ago, and I feel like our rubric has shifted a bit over time. And actually, I have plans to revisit Final Fantasy VII next, so stay tuned for that. Now comes the part where I recommend this game to specific people. I'd say, play this game if you want to experience incredible music and some fun puzzle solving in the context of an RPG, and you don't mind dated 3D graphics and a slightly lackluster battle system. If the graphics or the battle system are deal breakers for you, you can just listen to the soundtrack. Okay, pal. Maybe you're not my favorite game of all time, but I'm still happy to have you stay on my shelf. I might not never play you again, though. Adios, amigo. Thanks for watching. Here's another video YouTube thinks you might like, and here's a playlist of other video game reviews. Check out our other playlists if you're interested in music reviews or any of the covers that my friends and I make. And that should be about it. Maintain your groovy selves.